Some stories slip through the cracks of memory, buried beneath logic and time, but they never really leave. They linger in the spaces between thoughts, in the silence before sleep, in the flicker of a passing shadow. You tell yourself they aren't real, that they never happened, that they couldn't have happened. But then something reminds you. A sound, a glimpse, a feeling. Cold and sudden, like fingers brushing the back of your neck. You turn, expecting nothing, but the air is heavy, charged with something unseen. It started as a whisper. A rumor passed between classmates, a warning spoken with nervous laughter. The kind of thing you hear and forget until it's too late. I should have forgotten. I should have ignored it. I didn't. Now I wonder if she was ever real at all, or if I just let the thought of her sink too deep, settle too long. Maybe I gave her a place to stay. Maybe that's all it takes. I don't know if you've heard of her. Maybe you have. Maybe you haven't. Maybe it doesn't matter, because now she's listening. It started as nothing. A rumor, a passing mention, a name spoken too casually. Someone said they knew a friend who had seen her. Someone else said they had heard her voice. No one believed it. Not really. Stories like that spread because people like to be afraid. She was supposed to be a myth, a thing told to scare children. A woman in a mask, waiting in the dark, asking a simple question. If you answered wrong, you disappeared. If you answered right, you still weren't safe. There was no way to win. At first, it was easy to ignore. A story was just a story. But then it changed. The whispers grew. People said she was seen near the train station, outside school gates, by the river where the streetlights flickered. No one had proof. No pictures, no videos, just words and unease. Some of us laughed. Some of us stayed out late on purpose, daring her to find us. Most of us went home before sunset. Then someone went missing, a girl from another school. No one knew if it was true or if it was part of the story. Her name was passed around, but no one had actually known her. She had been here, then she wasn't. It didn't feel like a game anymore. Something had changed. The air felt heavier when the sun went down. The streets seemed too quiet. Some nights, walking home, it felt like someone was just out of sight. The feeling crept in slow, settling in your chest, making you walk faster even when you told yourself nothing was there. The story should have faded, but it didn't. It grew, stretched, twisted. People stopped talking about whether she was real. They started talking about how to survive. The night was warm, thick with the scent of pavement and distant rain. It had been another long evening, the kind where time slipped away too easily. The streets were quiet, the air still. Streetlights flickered, buzzing faintly in the emptiness. Walking home always felt different at night. The world stretched, pulled at the edges, turning familiar places into something less certain. Buildings looked taller. Shadows stayed too long. The spaces between streetlights felt deeper than before. There were three of us, laughing at nothing, talking about things that didn't matter. The silence between words felt heavier than usual, pressing in, waiting. Somewhere in the back of my mind, the story sat like a seed, small but growing. It was just a tale. It had always been just a tale. Then she was there, standing at the corner, just beyond the reach of the nearest street lamp, a woman, still, unmoving, head slightly tilted as if listening. The world seemed to pause. The air thickened. My pulse slowed, deep and loud in my ears. Nothing about her was strange, not at first. She wore a long coat, dark hair falling over her shoulders. A mask covered her mouth. That was normal. Masks were normal, but something wasn't right. She didn't move, didn't shift her weight, didn't breathe. She stood too perfectly still, like something waiting for permission to come closer. One of us spoke. I don't remember what they said. I only remember the way the words fell flat, swallowed by the night. She took a step forward. It was slow, deliberate, not hesitant, not cautious. A step made by someone who already knew the outcome. Another step. The distance between us felt smaller than it should have. The space around us felt wrong. The street behind her seemed to bend, stretching in a way I couldn't explain. Something in my chest told me to move. The others laughed, brushed it off, stepped closer. I stayed where I was. She raised a hand, fingers light against the edges of her mask. My breath caught. I understood then. She wasn't asking. She was waiting. She lifted the mask just enough, and beneath it, there was no hesitation, no doubt, only a smile. It stretched too wide, carved deep into her skin, raw and jagged. Torn flesh curled at the edges, pulled tight over yellowed teeth. The grin was too sharp, too deep, too much. It wasn't a mouth meant for speaking. It was something made for something else. Someone gasped. Someone else stumbled back. I couldn't move. Her head tilted, the movement unnatural, like a puppet adjusting to its strings. Her lips didn't move, but the space around her did. The air bent, the darkness shifted. Something was wrong. One of us ran. The sound of footsteps hit the pavement, sharp and fast, swallowed by the empty street. The rest of us stood frozen. She didn't chase. She didn't need to. Her eyes found mine, dark and endless, pulling me in, making it impossible to look away. The smile never faded. It was patient. It had time. I felt something deep in my stomach, curling, twisting, warning. I had made a mistake. She had been waiting for this. The night didn't feel real anymore. The air was too thick, pressing in from all sides. The streets stretched too long, twisting in ways they shouldn't. The city felt empty, like it had been swallowed whole. We ran. Footsteps pounded against the pavement, but the sound felt distant, swallowed by the heavy silence. The streetlights flickered, struggling to keep the darkness at bay. Every shadow seemed to move, shifting just at the edges of vision. I didn't look back. I couldn't. She was behind us. Not running, not chasing, just there. Every time I turned a corner, every time I thought we had put distance between us, she was waiting. Standing just ahead, motionless, head tilted. Watching. It didn't make sense. She wasn't moving fast, wasn't even trying, but the space between us never grew. She was always just too close. The others scattered. Someone called my name, voice cracking, lost to the heavy air. I kept running, kept pushing forward, lungs burning, legs screaming. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to go. But the streets wouldn't let me leave. Every turn brought me back to the same place. The same empty road, the same flickering streetlight, the same waiting figure. She was closer now. The mask was still in place, but the damage underneath was impossible to forget. The grin was burned into my mind, stretched too wide, too deep, a wound that had never healed. My breath hitched, my vision swam. I wasn't escaping. I was being led. The streets had no end, no beginning, no way out. Every turn led nowhere. Every alley stretched too long, bending in ways that shouldn't be possible. I kept moving, but I wasn't getting anywhere. She was always there, standing just at the edge of the light, waiting. She never rushed, never lunged. She didn't have to. Every time I thought I had lost her, she was already ahead, standing still, head tilted, eyes locked on mine. The city felt dead. No voices, no cars, no wind, just the sound of my own breathing, ragged and uneven. The streetlights flickered, casting her shadow in too many directions. I tried to focus, tried to think, tried to wake up, but this wasn't a dream. My reflection followed me in the glass of empty windows, but something was wrong. It moved when I didn't. It lingered a second too long after I passed. The face looking back at me wasn't my own. I stopped. The air pressed in, thick and suffocating. She was closer now. The mask barely covered what was underneath. That impossible grin, the torn skin, the way her head tilted just slightly, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. She was behind my eyelids, too. The city stretched, twisted, curled in on itself. My thoughts did the same. There was no waking up, no leaving, no running. She had me. She had always had me. There had to be a way out. There had to be something I wasn't seeing. The streets weren't real anymore. The city had melted into something else, something wrong. Nothing followed the rules I knew. She stood ahead, waiting, patient. The mask barely mattered. I knew what was beneath. The grin was burned into my mind, stretched wide, torn at the edges, waiting for me to speak. I forced myself to think. The stories, the warnings. There was always a way. Not a way to win, but a way to survive. The ones who escaped, what had they done? They didn't say yes. They didn't say no. They said something else. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy, my legs weak. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to look away, to disappear. But that wasn't an option. I had to answer. Not the right answer. Not the wrong one. Something else. The air around me thickened. The streetlights buzzed louder. My own breath felt too shallow. I spoke. She tilted her head, listening. The silence stretched. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then she smiled wider. I didn't know if it had worked. I didn't know if I had bought myself another moment, another night, another life. But I was still standing. For now. The air was thick. Too thick. It pressed against my skin, crawled into my lungs, made each breath feel heavy. The The street around me blurred, shifting at the edges like heat rising off pavement. I wasn't sure if I was standing still or if the ground itself was moving beneath me. She didn't move. She didn't have to. The mask was slipping, just slightly, the edges peeling away, revealing what waited underneath. That jagged, impossible grin. The skin torn and raw, the smile too wide, too deep. She was waiting. The stories had never said what happened after this. The ones who escaped never spoke of what came next. They only told of the moment before, the feeling of being watched, the voice that followed them into sleep. But none of them had ever made it this far. I had answered, but it wasn't enough. She wanted more. The hum in my chest grew sharper, a sound without sound, something that existed just beneath the surface of reality. The city around us twisted, stretching into something unfamiliar. The buildings lost their shape, the windows swallowed the reflections. The street beneath my feet felt too thin, like I was standing on something that wasn't meant to hold weight. She tilted her head, just slightly. I understood then. This wasn't about words. It never had been. She wanted something deeper, a choice, a surrender. The final question was never spoken. It was felt. It was already inside me. I knew what she was asking, and I knew there was no right answer. The world held its breath. The buildings had no shape anymore. The street was just a suggestion, stretching into nothing. The air hummed, pressing into my skin, sinking into my bones. Everything around me had melted into something hollow, something that wasn't really there. But she was. She stood in front of me, still, patient. The mask barely clung to her face now, its purpose long forgotten. The grin beneath was endless, carved deep, pulling her face into something that wasn't human. The longer I looked, the less I understood what I was seeing. She had asked the question without speaking. It wasn't about words, not anymore. It was about understanding. I had come too far. There was no escaping now. No running, no tricks, no whispered superstitions to save me. I had to decide. My chest felt tight, my mind stretched thin, unraveling like thread. The space around me rippled, shifting, waiting for my choice. There was no right answer. There was only before and after. The world flickered. My vision swam, my pulse slowed, I opened my mouth, and I answered. The world didn't end. The air didn't shatter. The sky didn't swallow me whole. I was standing. The street was still beneath my feet. The city stretched ahead, quiet, unchanged. The lights flickered, buzzing softly in the night. Cars passed in the distance. Somewhere someone laughed. A door shut. Life moved on. But something was different. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted. The hum hadn't faded. The space around me felt too thin, stretched at the edges like something had pushed through and left a tear. She was gone. But I knew better. I had answered, but the game wasn't over. It never was. The ones who survived didn't talk about it because there was nothing left to say. You don't escape. You don't forget. You just keep moving, pretending nothing changed. But sometimes late at night, in the quiet just before sleep, I feel it again. A presence, a weight, a question hanging in the air. And I know she's still waiting. Tonight's story couldn't have happened without the help of the lovely supporters on screen. Your generosity keeps these stories alive, and I can't thank you enough. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, behind-the-scenes updates, and even early story releases, consider joining my Patreon. Every bit helps keep the lights on and the stories coming. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay out of the woods.